my teeth.
Oh, there we are. Welcome to the No Show. My name's Andrea Edwards.
My name is Joe Augustin.
And my name's Tim Wade. Welcome to the show that helps you get in the know about key news that's been happening throughout the week or the last couple of weeks. And in particular, key elements that we really need to be in the know of so that we can have those conversations that really matter. We will cover some of the highlight news that has come to our attention in the headlines, but we're also going to go into those issues that sometimes get pushed back to the latter pages because they're so big, so pervasive, and they're no longer shiny, but they're really important. And we're going to talk about them. And those are usually at the moment, they're COVID, climate, environment, things like that. But we're also going to talk about some other interesting topics and hopefully have a little bit of fun on the way.
Yeah, I was going to say, we usually get to that when we talk about the stuff that isn't all the terribly important stuff. And I was looking at the stuff we're looking at in terms of news that caught our eye. And I think we definitely will be going into the fun area in that particular part of the program.
Yeah, but we've been away for a couple of weeks. We've had a little bit of time off. Andrea came to Singapore.
I did. I came back exhausted.
Well, I mean, you had a schedule of just meeting people and doing very little else.
Well, yeah, I mean, and it was hard because you could only meet 10 people. There's 4 of us, so that's only 6 people. So we had to leave our boys at home, which they loved. They got to adventure all over Singapore independently, which all teenagers need. But it was fantastic, but I couldn't see half the people I wanted to see. And so I'm having a lot of messages with people. I'm like, I'm sorry, I can't catch up with you. There's just no more space. So I hope those caps are going.
And I was a little bit disappointed that we didn't even have a no-show reunion in real life. I mean,
yeah, I know.
Yeah. Yeah, well, maybe we're all in the same room right now, just with narrow shoulders. But yeah, maybe next time, Andrea, what you should do is you should take a leaf out of the marathon runner's book and just go along the road and just have everyone you want to meet lined up. And you just high-five them as you go past. They give you a drink. All out how you're going, and they can run with you a little bit, have a bit of a chat. Of course, there's one minor problem with that whole idea, and that's the running marathon part. But
yeah, that's a problem.
maybe a rickshaw. You can be on a rickshaw going through the whole thing. People can hop on and off.
Oh, I like that idea.
Yeah. I think that's kind of cool.
Yeah, but will the caps come off soon? The numbers, the limits? Any idea what's going on?
I haven't heard anything about that. So it's been one of those things that have been quietly, put aside. I think 10 has been seen as a quite reasonable number for most people. So I think we'll probably stay at that for a while. There's been very little talk, actually, as far as I've heard.
Right. I don't think there wouldn't be any dangling of a bigger number until after Hari Raya. Because otherwise there would be why didn't it happen before Hari Raya, so we can get everybody together. It's usually like that. And of course, so there's an element of you've got Chinese New Year, Hari Raya, and Christmas as the 3 huge festivals, and there's Deepavali as well. And so if you release for one festival and clamp down on the others, then people can get annoyed. So you've got to try and make sure that everybody goes through the same amount of pain, and then you release at a time that everybody else can have the same benefit, kind of.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's closely thought out as that, but I would imagine it is.
Well, I was going to ask you if you were suggesting that was the case, but it did sound exactly like you did. So anyway, it was really fun. It was really fun to have you around, Andrea, and that very, very long catch up we had on the first night. That was really wonderful.
Yeah, no, it was great. It was really great to be there. It was very interesting going into Singapore after being in Thailand, because every country is going through this in a different way, right? So Steve was in Australia and it's like nothing had ever happened. Everyone's out in the streets, no masks, but everyone's drinking, having a good time. And then obviously in Thailand, we've sort of had surges of the virus where we've locked down. You can only have 20 people in a room, but never 10. But usually you can have about 20, 30, sometimes you can't have a party. And a friend of ours went viral when they had a couple of friends over at their house during one of the lockdowns. But on the whole, we don't feel locked down here. We've chosen when to lock down and then we've opened up. So it's really interesting going into a country that just really feels like it's starting to emerge. So and I could feel it. I could feel that real difference within Singapore society compared to at least my example in Thailand and the other people that I've talked about. So I think it's really important to remember that every single country is going through a very, very, very different experience at this time. And, the harm that's been done within societies is part of it. And, so I think, that was fascinating to me.
Yeah, and I think the rebound as well is quite interesting because I think we've been in a situation where we've always had to have the mask all the time, and now we actually have a set of rules where you don't need the mask when you're outdoors, and we still tend to have them.
Yeah, people who don't live in the tropics have no idea how uncomfortable it is either, do they?
Well, it's one of those things which I was just aware of what I felt like, and I think it's always about comparison, right? When you have a place to compare it to, you go, okay, therefore it's so much more uncomfortable. And I was just thinking to myself, I'd been doing this so much for the last few days. I actually walked quite a distance, and I realized I had my mask on, and I didn't really make that much of a difference to me. So I don't know. It's one of those things whether I got acclimatized to it, and maybe I don't breathe that heavily, or I don't need to take in as much oxygen along the way. It kind of worked out okay for me, and I think for most people it's about what you notice, right? If you notice it while you're doing it, it becomes difficult, or something that's irritating becomes difficult to handle. But if you can take your focus off it, sometimes you kind of just get along and move along with it. So I don't know. I do see. I know the people who are visiting Singapore just love it now. They came at the best time. I mean, I'm sure you felt that you came at a really, really good time as well, because you could, if you wanted to be outside, just have it without the mask. And I think the boys, when they went to the park, they were able to have the mask off for most of it, right?
Yeah. So it's more the sweatiness of a mask on your face that you take it off at the end, and it's just soaked in sweat. Lovely.
It's moisturization.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't seem to get that because my mask is now a sponge with a couple of strings on it. So that just soaks it all up, just give it a bit of squeeze, keep going.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right. Do you want
to get into the news?
Yeah. So are you ready for the first one?
Yeah, go.
Testicle tanning is a thing.
Yep.
All right. So we like to start off with something light because it's important. So
red light, actually, if you really want to get into details. I actually, and funnily enough, even though you brought it up very currently, right? I actually was looking at some older videos online, and I came across the video. So I was traumatized then, and then now when I read your article, I had to relive the trauma. I don't know whether you've seen the video, or the video that goes along with it, that particular moment where someone is standing akimbo, in front of a radiator of some sort, I think, basically, where all the light is focused on their nether regions.
Yeah, it's very Christ-like too, right? That whole imagery. I thought that was a bit weird. But anyway, so just to give you some insight, so Tucker Carlson of Fox News fame has decided to release a documentary called The End of Men. So, masculinity is going under an identity crisis. And so he's decided to do this. And he's released a trailer, and they say it's packed with images of topless men wrestling, chopping wood, and firing guns. So it's good that that's what men want to do. And these are the words. Once a society collapses, then you're in hard times. Those hard times inevitably produce men who are tough, men who are resourceful, men who are strong enough to survive. They go on to reestablish order, and so the cycle begins again. I thought one of my favorite comments in the articles that I read was his tweet by a man who said, I'm sitting here next to my gay husband. Got a bit of back noise. I'll start again. I'm sitting here next to my gay husband, living my gay life, reading a gay novel as research for a new gay book. And yet I am not and will never be as gay as whatever is haunting Tucker Carlson's fantasies. So, guys, if you're a soft man, apparently you need to tan your testicles. So go and have a look. Apparently most of the sort of backlash has been sort of humor. But I thought that was a pretty interesting one to start with.
Well,
Why?
as I always I'll try to understand different people. But by the way, Carlson has also been sanctioned by, or at least officially sanctioned in a good way, by the Russian media. I think they've actually recommended that they play his clips on Russian TV. Because what he says seems to be most in line with what they want to say as well. So that's a separate thing. So there may be more to this, but no, I was trying to get into the mind of the band, and I I kind of understand where he's coming from, because like right now the clampdown seems to be on masculinity, right? And they don't just say you're very masculine; they tend to drop in the word toxic as well. And I think there's always some validity in terms of the spectrum, right? Some of it's going to be on this end where it's going to be toxic masculinity. Some of it is just masculinity, right? And a point about gay. I think if you go back far enough in history, you'll find there were very formidable gays back in Roman times. So that's not a that's not something to
more so in the Greek.
Yeah, and the Greeks, it was very much so, just the thing to do, right?
Yeah, well, that's why homophobia became a real thing within Christianity, because the Greeks were so much freer, and then when the Christian Church formed, and the Romans were all about suppressing it.
Yeah.
Because of the history between the two nations.
It's always the Europeans, yes.
yeah. But yeah, so Tim, you asked the question why. So look, there's lots to it, but there's it's called bromeopathic versus homeopathic, and basically there's this whole health and wellness area that's linked to this, and testicle tanning is part of that story. So go and have a look into it. It's really interesting, and I'd never heard of most of this, and so
would you like to hear some of the purported science? I mean, I can help with this.
Yeah.
So it's not about getting like melanin on that part of your body. It's about the activation of the glands. Essentially, it's about trying to make sure that we don't have a depletion of testosterone supply, because the society and the norms seem to suppress that. Now, of course, the funny thing is, if they truly succeed, I mean, not necessarily through the tanning, but they truly succeed in the increase the secretion, so to speak, of testosterone. What you will then have is also bald men, because that's one of the things about testosterone. When you have, most men go through male pattern baldness because of testosterone. It's actually what your body does in response to it. And so, I don't know. We'll see. It's an interesting future. We'll look at where everybody's lifting weights, shooting guns, and has no hair.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with bald men, of course, because I'm married to one. My brothers and my dad are all bald, and my sons will definitely be bald because it's a matriarchal heritage, I think. But anyway, I showed it to Steve, my hubby, and he basically just went. He couldn't believe what he was looking at, and it's seriously, when you watch this video, you can't believe what you're looking at. I mean, because they're also milking cows and stuff, and it's just bizarre. And he found it quite confronting from the point of view of what right does he think he has to define what being masculine is to me? And so I think I'd be really interested in what you guys think of it after you actually watch it, and I'll watch the whole thing when it goes live, because I think it's an interesting idea that we do need to address it, because there is an issue with women as well, and we do need to address it. Whether or not this is the right way of addressing it is obviously up for debate.
Well,
I'm also going to borrow a comedian's observation about the milking scene in that particular promo. There is milking going on, but there is no bucket.
Oh yeah, right. Good point. Good point. Yeah. So Tim's just sitting there looking confused.
Well, I don't know. I the fact that they chose Tucker Carlson.
No, I think he chose it.
Well, either way, it's no thanks. I don't think I'll be watching it, but happy to hear the comment about it. But I'm not going to waste my time supporting anything he has to do.
For the no show, I think it's obligatory. Okay, so moving on to a more serious story. In the Atlantic is a story that says why American teens are so sad And basically, there's a study by the CDC from 2009 to 2021 that basically American high school students who say they feel persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness, and it's risen from 26% to 44%. And I think when we did the last No Show, we were talking about some news coverage in Australia about teens in Australia thinking of suicide, attempting suicide, or self-harming. And so in the last couple of years, there's obviously, and we were obviously talking about in the mental health with Dion, but there's a big issue in our world, not just with our youth, but I think with our societies around the world. And we need to be developing resilience now, because the years ahead, I actually think we're going to look back on these COVID times as a time of peace. In the years ahead, I think, is when the challenges are really going to be coming to us. And we've got to work out, how do we get people stronger, and how do we get their minds stronger to be ready to cope? And, like when the Ukraine warfare started, the feeling that went around the world of despair, because it was just one more thing. Mm-hmm. But I actually think we're going to be in the one more thing for some time to come, if not, permanently. So
yeah,
we've got to work out how to do this. And of course, governments have taken away money and funding from mental health initiatives in countries all over the world. So we're in a very weak position to handle it. So I think it's a bit of not a bit of a concern. I think this is a major concern that we need to get on top of.
Well, I was reading the article as well, and I think it's important to point out what they also mentioned, which was that it's not, there's some things that they are pretty sure it's not, and the reasons that is not the case. So they took the pandemic out of the picture because it was a rising trend even before that. But, you're absolutely right about the fact that challenges there are coming. But I think, and I've always, brought this point up. It's about knowing, right? When you have a means of knowing, and the means of knowing, unfortunately, is social media, right? So the person who lived in the past didn't have to know everything and didn't have the opportunity to know everything. And if they didn't read the newspaper or watch the news, they probably wouldn't have found out about stuff. Whereas now, because of social media, while you're scrolling something else or watching a YouTube video or doing something else altogether, there's still an opportunity for you to have something that comes up. And the likelihood that something's going to come up is usually going to be because it's emotionally engaging to the wider audience. That's why it's being served up to you as well. And therefore, it's going to be something that it's very, very unlikely it's going to be just good news, although good news gets spread quite a bit as well. But it's likely to be all the disturbing stuff, right? And I think one of the things that happens is knowing about it and having no way to do something about it. So you know about it, but you can't do anything about it. And that is the combination that really gives you the sense of hopelessness, right? You don't know what to do.
Yeah, and it does talk about things like that, like the impact of young teens, sort of 12 to 14-year-olds being on social media. So to me, sort of listening to it, is it time for us to say, and it's an impossible thing to do. Like, how do you get kids off it? How do you stop them starting it? Because even if you try and stop them being on it, the chances are they're going to find a way to be on it because everybody else is, right? But it's doing harm to their psyche. So that's part of the story, but it's not the whole story, because eco-anxiety is obviously a big part of the story as well. And that's a growing thing. And I've noticed 2022, I'll talk about doomers later, but there's a rise of doomers, but there's also a rise of eco-anxiety, and people are dealing with their eco-anxiety on social media in public, and they are freaking out because they've just finally coming to terms with what's really going on. And when you've already been through your eco-anxiety years and years ago and you go in waves of it, you can see it, right? So there's a lot, it appears like there's a lot more, and there is a lot more, but it's only people transitioning through this phase of, oh my God, this is where we are, and so the next phase is coming out the other end and going into action and solutions and all that sort of stuff. So there's some other patterns I'm seeing as well, which but I do think is a big issue that we need to get on top of as societies around the world, especially for our young people. I feel like, in so many ways we're letting our young people down. We're not paying attention to what they need right now. in any way.
I'm wondering whether, if you go back 100 years, we would have just come out of, if we were back 100 years, we would have just come out of World War One. And we would be at this time of, it would be the beginning of the Roaring Twenties, 1922. And things have been looking up. Fast forward sort of 17 years, and you're into World War II again. And just imagine everyone just going...
You missed the Depression.
Oh, yeah, there was the Great Depression in the 30s,
Yeah.
and then World War II, and then you just get everybody just going, why are we doing this again?
Yeah.
And then you come out of that, and then you've got, Korea, Vietnam, all these other bits and pieces. So I'm wondering whether we've just had this period of sustained, what feels like sustained peace for a while, coupled with, so I think, at a guess, I think a lot of these numbers would have been happening for the youth at the time, at any of those times in history, except we weren't reporting on it, and we weren't expressing this hopelessness and sadness so publicly that it becomes either normative or labeled or measured. I mean, it's very easy to measure it now. I mean, I remember once as a child I would have been about 10, and I remember lying in bed. I would have been 10 or 11. I was lying in bed just thinking World War III is about to happen. I think it was the middle of the Cold War was getting all peculiar at the time, early 80s, like very, very early 80s, 1981, 82, 83, something like that. And I was just lying there thinking, the world, there's war coming, and I just didn't know what I could do, and I just felt so helpless and fearful in a way, and I just thought there was going to be a nuclear war everywhere, and I know that's a bit different to this. This is not an 11-year-old necessarily feeling anxious in that way, but these are high school students, so I guess they're sort of 16, 17. And so I guess what I'm sort of saying is, I don't think that this is a new phenomenon. I just think it's magnified because of the ease of collecting data. And it doesn't mean at all that we should ignore it. It means we've got real data there to be able to say, maybe we should think about this. But I think that if social media is the biggest problem, then weirdly enough, the solution is putting walls in place and censorship effectively, and then we're back to free speech again.
Yeah.
And so I was thinking about this a bit earlier today about what does freedom really cost? And I think freedom costs, this is going to sound weird, but freedom costs millions of disadvantaged people. It costs them their opportunity, in a sense.
I agree.
And the reason is, and this sounds counterintuitive, but the reason is because for me to do whatever I want and to be irresponsible in the decisions that I make with regards to what I buy, what I throw away, all of that sort of stuff, is going to cost the disadvantaged person who can't do the stuff. So the price of my freedom, in a way, is a lot of poor people suffering.
Yeah.
And the cost of that pursuit, I want to be a billionaire so freaking bad. That whole pervasive culture of I just got to get to there, that's costing because if I just need to get to here, and that's more than enough, it's more than enough for my family and the next generation to be taken care of. If it's more than enough, and I can start focusing on helping those other people and sharing a little bit, not in a communist way, but in a globally responsible way, then I would have thought that we can help all of those people. But it means that I got to sacrifice something, which means I don't have the freedom to do whatever the hell I want. So at some point we need to define what freedom is, because I think that's the challenge here. I think a lot of these kids have been fed goals that are unattainable. And as a result, they're thinking, how can I can't. How do I become Elon Musk?
Yeah.
You know, I can't even afford a house.
I love that. You know, when you said the cost of freedom, I just immediately went into Team America's theme song in my head. Have you guys seen that? Yeah. That was where I went. But I think it's absolutely the right question, you know, because when we look at the climate crisis, it is because the 10% of the world. So I've been recently sharing some data, which is an average income of $38,000 or higher is the 10%, $119,000 or higher is the top 1%, and the 0.001% are, you know, they're off in another realm, and they actually contribute nation scale contribution levels, right? But basically
because of their property,
because of everything,
because of the businesses that they run.
Yeah, and the space missions that they run and all that sort of stuff, right? But, you know, I know people who are, you know, in Australia on $38,000 a year. That is not considered a good salary for an Australian, but for somebody in India, that would be a good salary. So they're very different ideas when you think about salaries in different countries and lifestyles and stuff. But, you know, that average Australian who's in the top 10%, the way they consume, you know, the amount of meat they consume, milk, the amount of clothes they buy, and, you know, the lower your salary is, the cheaper the clothes you buy, the more contribution to the climate crisis, right? So it's a really challenging one, because wealthy countries are contributing, but the people who are contributing probably the most as far as the waste produced are not the wealthiest, but they can't afford the higher quality products. So, you know, we're in this constant loop, right? But the biggest message is every single one of us needs to shrink our lifestyle down to 87%. You know, we've got to shrink our lifestyle by 87%. Can you imagine what that looks like for you? I've probably got us down 20, 30% now with everything that we do. I'm saying no to flights. But if I have to fly, you know, at some point we live an international life. Our families live in other parts of the world, right? The aerospace industry won't have planes that are, you know, emissions free until at least another decade. So it's difficult, right? The choices that we have to be making now. So you can't offset it all. There's not enough offsetting to do. But I planted 750 trees today for Earth Day. I'll do what I can, you know.
Yeah.
You know, I think this thing about offset, I think we maybe sometimes also take it too much on ourselves, and we say that we can't do very much. I don't think we can pull back that much. I mean, you've estimated yourself as pulling back by 30%. I'm gonna guess you've actually pulled back a lot more without realizing you have, just because of the things you do on a regular basis, right? Or the things you don't do on a regular basis. Because even like myself, someone who's not, I would say I'm not actively, you know, trying to work on the environment. I'm sorry to say that to you like that as well, but I'm not the climate avenger, right? But I've realized that my own lifestyle as well, it's kind of dialed back. You know, I think about the number of times I've bought a pair of jeans, much to my wife's chagrin, in the last 5 years, is none. You know, I've just worn the same pair for all this time. As we get older, I find anyway that many of us actually almost inadvertently do some things which are a little bit greener, as in we're less driven by having to get new fashion all the time. We're less driven by getting the latest watch and stuff all the time.
Really?
Maybe not Tim.
No, I'm thinking your t-shirts. You're getting a lot of t-shirts.
Yeah, I get t-shirts. Yeah, but that was the I was thinking about that. I said that's the only thing that I've done in the last few years. Like, I haven't got a new suit forever. I was just about to get one, and I realized I hadn't got one for a long time. I drive my car into the ground nowadays. It's like, I'm not driving a car, but I am driving it into the ground. I don't take it out as often as I used to. I drive a lower capacity car because, you know, for me now, performance isn't quite as fun as, you know, saving bucks on fuel. So that there is some stuff, and I think about this as well. There's a consumption, right? As I get older, what I'm doing is I'm inadvertently also consuming healthier food, cutting down on meat, and I'm just saying that sometimes those who are hard on ourselves maybe are a bit too hard, because I'm someone who's not trying, and I think if I just add it all up, I think I've done pretty all right. Not because I've been trying very hard, but a slight adjustment on my part makes a difference. And I think people like yourself are doing much more than the 30% you underestimate.
Yeah. Well, we keep trying. So another story that broke this week, of course, is Netflix lost subscribers. So they're expecting to add more than 2 million, and they've lost 200,000 in the first quarter, and they're expecting even more next quarter, another 2 million subscribers lost. So the stock's collapsing down 25%. And I find this a really fascinating story of a business. So this is a publicly listed company. I've taken some companies through IPO before, right? So during the pandemic, of course, subscribers went up because people were at home, and of course, more competition in the streaming space has happened. But the decisions that the company is making now, and the idea of continual growth, which is the problem that has put the world in where it is at the, and even though a streaming service isn't at the core of the world's problems, it's the mindset of continual growth. And I'd love to see Netflix just, if they could continue to provide outstanding content that we want to watch and keep their customers, surely that's a business model that's worth rewarding versus this idea that you've just got to keep growing. I don't know, Joe, you know much more about this sort of stuff.
Well, I mean, this is the thing, right? If you're a company and you're trying to be sustainable, the sustainable as a company, most times you see it as a thing where you have to be able to support the bigger staff, support the bigger machinery, and very few companies say that, what we need to do to really become more successful, we need to become smaller, which it's actually something that Netflix could consider. But what they do need to do to be more successful, despite a smaller company, is they need to have more subscribers. So the problem that they're all going to try and solve is that problem. How do we get more customers? How do we get more from each of these customers? That's the usual thing. So that's why they're coming up with the creative ideas that they have, which may end up being something we don't recognize in 10 years from now. I mean, Netflix today means watching TV shows and stuff. I mean, 3 to 5 years ago, it meant watching all the network stuff that wasn't available anymore. Today, it's all the stuff that's left after the networks have taken back their stuff for their own streaming services, and then Netflix produces new movies as well. And as mentioned in that article as well, Netflix is now going into video games. So as is Microsoft, as is a number of other companies as well. So they're all going into different ways that they can serve their clients more, therefore get more money from the clients. They may not necessarily increase the number of subscribers, but they may increase the value per head of their customers. The executives are always going to try and figure out something. So two things about that. One, if you're wondering whether Netflix is worthwhile investing in, they still have the people who are there to try and solve business problems and make it more valuable. So I'd say it's a worthwhile investment and probably undervalued at this particular point, or at least more fairly valued at this point.
Oh, Joe's giving an investment tip. I like it.
I'm just thinking about this as in like how to look at stuff. They dropped some subscribers, but it's not unexpectedly. I think that the market conditions were such that this was going to happen. You had all these people pushing out their streaming services, Disney having much more impact than even Disney expected to have, because they happened to bring out a lot of great content on a platform which I thought was a little bit too expensive. But then again, if you have kids, it changes the whole the equation. So they've taken away dollars from the streaming market, and like it or not, there's only so much time you can spend streaming. So you might, you and all the contracts are such that you can leave and come back to another one. So yeah, a lot of money went to Disney. A lot of it didn't go to Netflix.
Yeah, that's interesting. But it also sort of struck me as the disruptor could soon be disrupted. If they don't work out that next path. So that Kodak moment could, what was the video blockbuster?
Blockbuster.
Yeah, that they could actually be having the same moment that they created for the existing sort of technology. So I don't know, it'd be worth watching, I thought.
I think I get the feeling. So I kind of heard, there was a lot of talk when Disney started coming into the streaming market. That was the big red flag for Netflix, because they had a lot of content on Netflix and those sorts of channels, and they started pulling them out to put it on theirs, and then they bought Star World, I think it was, and so there was, and I was doing some work for Warner Media and Turner, who had come together. And so there was a lot going on in the market of people grabbing everyone to sort of come together to form their one. And it just feels like, to me, the .com frenzy a little bit, from the streaming side, and Netflix is Amazon, the incumbent. And kind of, even though in .com terms, Amazon was one of many. And it just feels like that. And it just feels like what will happen if Netflix stay the course and don't do anything to drive people away, that they could pick up some streaming services who may figure out that it's too hard. They can't create their own content. They have to keep buying it. Therefore, they just get out of the space and go and just play games or something like that. So, but what is really interesting out of this is, and keep your ears open for this one, but we're already feeling it, but it's just going to get bigger, is the subscriber model. The subscriber model is everything. It's like that's where they are all heading. They're all heading for the subscribers, and they're all heading for stickiness. And now even I'm just looking here on my Gmail, it just says your access to the G Suite Legacy free edition will end soon. Because I was one of the first G Suite ones. Now they want to start charging me. You can switch to this and get a special discount, and that'll be a new Google Workspace. Or in the coming weeks, you can join a waiting list for a no-cost option, which presumably will have ads on it. And it's like, so the Google, they've already taken away my free photos, and now they're charging me for Gmail. It's like that's pointing a gun, I think. Little bit. But they're seeing it as a money grab opportunity in the short term.
I don't know if it's a money grab. I think it's a taking it away from the toxic formula that we've had, where we're the product when we don't pay for the product. So, I think Google, Apple have been sort of switched on to that. And when you did the comparison with Netflix to, I can't remember who it was, I think potentially Netflix could even be a MySpace comparison if you look at social media, because I was working in the social media launching companies in the beginning of this century in Boston in the .com boom and bust days, and MySpace was the one that was really taking off, right? It was YouTube, MySpace, LinkedIn, pretty much. But who's here now?
And killed them,
yeah, and so potentially even we could be looking at a MySpace scenario where they kind of just fade away because these other bigger, more competitive, the whole metaverse comes into it and everything, so these companies that can sort of, so potentially they could be bought by somebody, right?
Yep.
Yeah, it's all the usurping of time. Ultimately, I think Microsoft wants to have Netflix so that they can have a metaverse through which they can stream movies and have online events and have all the content.
Yeah.
It's gonna end up pretty much like the way the rest of tech has gone. I think it will consolidate into smaller companies as well. It's hard to think about Netflix being consolidated into a company, but if I were thinking about Netflix, it's what Microsoft is missing. It's I think that's what they probably would like to have for themselves. So you have Amazon. Amazon's got their streaming service. Apple's got their streaming service. Google has tried their streaming service. Arguably, they have YouTube, which is the ultimate streaming service. And we haven't seen much of the impact of YouTube Premium here in this part of the world, but I've seen it being marketed in the US. And I think they're beginning to get their traction as well, because they have the reach, and I think everyone has come onto it at the same time to say, okay, you don't like ads, right? So here's a chance to have it free, so to speak, right?
And if you want more,
free.
Yeah.
ad-free anyway.
And then more control over your environment, more control over your algorithms, so,
Mhm.
we can sort that side of things out. So, yeah, it's an interesting space to watch, which, let's keep an eye on things. All right, should we get into global politics?
We should. I
So,
wonder what we can
yeah,
talk about.
yeah. There's a lot going on.
By the way, before we do that, have you seen on Netflix, the Ukrainian Prime Minister's show is on there?
Oh, no, I haven't watched it. Right, yeah.
So it's the show where he's I think he's a comedian who just hangs it on the government and says what they should do, and he eventually gets this is a movie. He gets elected to be the president.
Yeah.
So
I haven't seen it, but I did hear about it.
Creating art.
Yeah.
Pardon?
I haven't seen it, but I did hear about it. Have you watched it?
I was just like, oh no, I put it in my watch list, but I just thought that's just amazing, really.
Yeah.
Well,
okay, let's start with the Ukraine. Obviously, there's who knows? Honestly, who knows what's going on there? They've obviously pulled back, and Mariupol. And I'm sorry to anyone Ukrainian if I'm saying that the wrong way. That's where the focus has been, and the town's been basically completely destroyed. They found evidence. There's a Time magazine article that they believe there's a mass grave with 9,000 civilians buried there. But they've now pulled back to this steel mill. The steel mill's been completely destroyed, but there's all these underground bunkers in it, and they know that there's 2,000 soldiers, fighters in this complex, but they think that there's at least as many civilians with people as young as 3 months old. And basically Putin's ordered, don't worry about storming it and destroying it, just seal it up so that not even a fly can come through. So some stories are coming out. There's a lot of people who need medical aid, a lot of the elderly who are trapped there. There's no way for them to get out. So, I think this is going to be the next humanitarian story that really breaks through. And then on the other side, in the Jerusalem Post, there's a story that more Russian troops are refusing to fight. And there's one that in several units, the soldiers who are refusing to fight are as much as 60 to 70% of all of the soldiers. And if they don't fight, the Federal Security Service, or the FCB, are basically threatening to kill their relatives. So, but apparently severe morale crisis, lots of reports coming out. We heard in March that a Russian general was killed by his troops because of this boiling discontent amongst the Russian forces who are deployed in Ukraine. And in some ways, this is kind of one of those stories where this is the hope for the path out. And because, we're still here. Did you guys have a chance to read any of those ones, any of those stories?
Well, I didn't read the stories, but what I was looking at was with concern was how the Russians put on their most fierce of the generals to be singularly in charge of operations, and he's the guy who has the reputation for all the atrocities in Syria. So basically, they signaled their intent in that particular way. But yeah, I mean, I think this thing about humanity is the way it will be won. I think you hear the tactics that the Ukrainians have used, like will use kindness, right? If a soldier is captured, give him a phone, let him call his mom, look after him, give him food, give him shelter, and let people know about that. And my mom actually came up with this idea yonks ago. She had a friend who had. Basically, there was a woman making moves on her friend's husband, right? And so it came to my mom to kind of come up with a solution to it. And my mom said, just be nice to her. And that's what, was the defense that worked. It's very hard to be an enemy of someone who is nice.
Interesting. Good example. It does work, right? Another story that broke was there was a Russian released video of an intercontinental ballistic missile launch, which is nuclear capable, and sort of made out that it was something special. The US then came out and said it was an expected launch, so it's not something to get excited about. And there was another really interesting article in a Reuters piece, which was Russian teacher rejected Kremlin propaganda, and obviously then paid the price, lost his job, but didn't go to jail from what I've seen so far. But it was a really, really, really fascinating insight into how propaganda is used and infiltrated into the education system, which, of course, brings up another generation of people that believe in something different. And I just had dinner with two ladies who were raised in the USSR until one was 14 and one was 18. And we were talking about their memories of what that meant, like, like one of the sporting activities, rather than throwing a javelin, they threw grenades. Not real grenades, but they look like grenades, right? And but also the mindset, the fact that they never questioned what they were being brought up with, but also the fact that their parents never encouraged them to question what they were being brought up with, because of course that would create problems for them at school. The teachers would report the parents, and then who knows what could happen. So it's a very interesting time, and I think people like me from Australia, my grandparents remember the suffering out of World War II and the shortages, but my parents and my generation didn't know. We don't have any memory of that, right? And like with Steve's parents in the UK, they actually do remember World War II, but I think most of us are at least 2 generations away from the memory of suffering. And here we have this whole region that in their lifetime, a significant part of their upbringing, they did go through this time. They did go through the propaganda. One of the stories was a lady in Russia who's a single mum with one child, and she can't stand up and speak out, because if she does and she gets in trouble, what happens to her child? So if you have an opportunity to speak to people who were raised in the USSR, I would really, really encourage it, just to sort of listen to what they say, what they think, what they were taught to believe, how it worked, because I think it gives us a better understanding of how what's going on right now is working. But did you read the teacher one? Some of the stuff in that I found fascinating.
Yeah, so he was basically given a teaching file by the Kremlin to teach to his students, and as he went through it, he was asking them to critique what this was, and then telling him a little bit about the history. So, for example, the history of Ukraine being some sort of Bolshevik setup versus hundreds of years of history. And so it was very brave and courageous, and really it comes down to I think what it came down to for him was he examined a moral responsibility of his position and made a decision to execute moral authority in his role over government authority. Yeah. And so then the question is, where's the moral authority lie? And it's and where do we get the moral authority from? And how are we encouraging that in our own families and our own societies and things like that? So obviously it's war over there, and they're trying to, but the fact that they're teaching their kids that, enlisting in the army is good and everything else, to me is a bit worrying, because it's preparation for something in the future.
Yeah.
Which goes back to something that Dion said, which was, this is sort of, kicking the tires of a future war to see what happens, to see how everybody reacts, which is very disconcerting.
But it's been going on for a long time, right? They've been closing down free speech for a long time, the media control. I mean, it's really that totalitarian closing. I mean, because China started to do it a couple of years ago as well, that real sort of bringing everything back and sort of bringing everything into the center in a different way, but not dissimilar, really. What's surprising is that Russia thinks it can do it this way, where it goes out and is antagonistic and violent towards one of its neighbors, and that the rest of us, are we that weak?
Yeah, it's very much a controlling dad kind of method. Like, this is my house and you'll do everything the way I say it must be done. Well, this doesn't make any sense. Just shut up and do it.
Yeah.
It sounds like, I know better. I've got more information. There's bigger things at stake. You are there. It's the opposite of servant leadership. It's very much leadership with a bunch of people there to serve you.
Yeah.
So it works in crisis, but it creates antagonistic. Well, with people with information, they and that sort of, I guess, a moral compass and a worldview that goes beyond, a singular party line. Look what's happening in Shanghai. I mean, bolting people into their homes is a hard-handed approach at dealing with a bug, and it is people are hungry and everything else. It's ivory towers at their greatest, showing something that is very missing. There's a disconnection with the people that they've been asked to rule over.
Rule or serve, right?
Yeah, I mean, but yeah, but I mean, if you really look at the history of rulers, they are there to rule. They're there to govern, I guess it would be a better way. But they're the ones that are just disasters, and there are ones that do the right thing. And we've been fortunate to be in a time where a lot of the ones in places where the rulers that we've had are at best very competent and at worst bumbling buffoons, but none of them seem to have been chaotic disasters. So, or self-serving chaotic disasters.
Yeah, there seem to be a few more of them around.
Well, so I've just been doing a bit of research on this essay that I'm doing with regards to the Roman Empire. And what's really interesting is when the Roman Empire, it was the Roman Republic. And just very briefly, and there's a little bit about the Roman Republic transitioned to a Roman Empire, because in the Republic, a lot of the senatorial placements of looking after territories, and they were the governor of a particular territory. You'd come from the Senate, and you were governing a territory, and you became extraordinarily wealthy enough to hire your own army to then start doing things and taking control, and then eventually it just became an empire, which is under an emperor, and then you look at today, and that's kind of where we are. We're in this people getting ridiculously wealthy enough to be able to rule large pieces of land, or at least a lot of people, and then get them rallying to go and attack an institution. For example, in America that happened, but we're seeing a lot of these sorts of authoritarian regimes happening, and it just feels like we are just in a never-ending loop, because as human beings we seem to fail to learn a very simple lesson that life is supposed to teach us, and it isn't all about the power and the wealth and me.
Yeah. I always saw the Roman Empire as a response to the corruption that became so endemic in society. It basically stopped functioning, which is where I think we are now. So the next revolution or renaissance is upon us, one way or another, and where we go now. So we've got a dystopian hell on one side, or we've got a utopian, beautiful thing on the other side. And we're not going to reach any of them, but we've got to go one direction, and we choose now which one it is. And we'll get halfway there. I hope we go the right path. But the Russian Roman history is fantastic. It was one of my subjects at university. So
amazing.
The oil market after the war is an article in Forbes. Now, I find a lot of the contributors to Forbes pretty substandard, but this is actually somebody who really stood out to me. And one of the things that he's gone really big picture, and he said the most important thing, and a lesson that never seems to penetrate the public mind: wars and crises tend to be transient and temporary, and many, if not most, factors will soon revert to pre-crisis behavior. So really recommend you have a look at that one, because he's sort of talking about, the sanctions are going to ease. The supply chains will eventually sort them out. We saw supply chains interrupted during the pandemic. They got sorted out. Then the war started. They got disrupted again. Also, politics are going to play a part. The US election, the midterm elections coming up in November, decisions are going to be made for that, not for the right reasons. And there's some other things. So it's a really, really interesting part. And the profit of war, Halliburton's profits jump. Outlook improves as drilling activity increases. So if you want to know who makes money out of war, they posted an 85% rise in first quarter adjusted profit, and also raised its forecast for customer spending in North America. Basically, there's a rally in oil and gas demand. So awesome. And then China's buying Russian coal at a heavily discounted price. So check that one out.
That's really interesting. That from a geopolitical perspective, I find that really interesting, because China could be paying normal price for that. So they're not. So China aren't supporting Russia from a political communist standpoint. China is still going, there's a deal to be had here.
Yeah. They also did come out.
I find that really interesting.
Yeah. They also came out and said that they still haven't spoken up against Russia invading Ukraine. So that was something else that happened this week. But the discounted fossil fuels, especially in the future, especially for oil and gas that's got to be drilled in the northern regions, it's going to be more expensive to actually get the oil out of the ground. So the discounted price moving forward, when the cost of actually extracting it's so high, that's going to play a part.
Well, the discount, it's going to be, I mean, China did this with Australia when they bought all the raw materials in there was this, during a global economic depression or a recession, they bought everything because everyone was happy to sell, and they just stockpiled.
Yeah.
I mean, they're very, very smart with regard, and they can act in, their ability to think in the future at 20-year timelines plus is a benefit of a single party system.
Yeah.
And they're playing the long game while everybody else is sort of, having parties during COVID and about to get thrown out. I mean, it's playing really, really small politics.
Yeah. No. Yeah. Absolutely. Do you want to jump in, Joe? No.
No. I was going to the door to get another coffee, just a middle of the afternoon coffee. No, I was thinking about how, we look at things and say, okay, this is where it's turned out well, it hasn't turned out well. And I think about, the empires over the years, right? There've been many, many different empires. And what we have right now is what's left over after everything settled down. To think that this is what we have now is right is also a little bit, it's assuming that just because we are here that this is the way it's supposed to be. You know what I mean?
We're at the zenith of evolution.
Yeah, because I think about how we live our lives. We tend to live our lives now like teenagers who get our way. And if we're not allowed to get our way, then it's an unpleasant life, right? So what's the meaning of life if you can't choose this, you can't choose that? And then if you think about things like, for instance, in China, what's going on, it seems terribly unfair that a few people are maybe a great number of people are being sort of imprisoned right now because of the disease. But if you think about it from a larger perspective, a societal perspective, right? If that's the reality that they're facing in that particular situation, what they have is a Omicron outbreak in a country that is not really inoculated to that particular disease. They're facing a very different kind of challenge that we're facing right now. And from a societal standpoint, is that maybe not the right thing to do? As in, like, if you were a dad and you had 10 kids and this is the situation right now, might you do that to the 10 kids? And if you said that I could trust you to stay in your house and not do anything, that'd be fine. But if I couldn't trust you, then what would I then do to protect the 9 kids who are not maybe in the best situation to protect themselves either? So it's a hard one to just call. I think we talked at the beginning of this about how the price of freedom, right? What's the price of freedom? And I think about what China has is it has to a great extent, it actually has a lot of freedom until it doesn't, right? So it's just like Australia. Australia, if you go down to it now, you go like, oh, it's a very free country, but it was the most locked down place in the world. And whether or not that was right at the time, it's beside the point. Is that when it was time for that kind of behavior, that was the behavior that it went through. It seemed like it might have been the right thing to do at the time, but we don't know how it plays out in the end. Is it are we just the teenagers who like the fact that we can get to do what we want to do?
Yeah. Well, yeah, the bigger, broader community responsibility, right?
Yeah.
All right. Tim's playing around with the visuals.
Yeah, I was just going to go over there, and I was trying to do it without everybody noticing that I was doing it.
Yeah, no, you did a great job. Yeah, do you want me to do?
Yeah,
do you want me to do it?
Yeah,
you can't do it
something.
yourself. All right. All right. So one of the stories that's been sort of brewing ever since the beginning, and there's a really good article in Prospect magazine called "The War in Ukraine Has Exposed the West's Refugee Hypocrisy." And it's a really, really, really fascinating read, and I encourage everyone to read. And it's arguing that Ukrainians are no better or worse than Syrians, Yemenis, Eritreans, or Iraqis, which is absolutely correct. And it's saying the West has fallen in love with those refugees in a way that it's been incapable of doing with those from Africa and the Arab world. Inhumanity and hypocrisy are self-evident. In Calais, Ukrainians are put up in hotels for free, while Sudanese and Eritrean teenagers are evicted from campsites by armed police. So, this is a tough one because, yes, it looks like it to me, but at the same time, I've always seen the Ukrainian refugee crisis in it with different eyes. If the Europeans want to do what they can to help Ukraine get through this crisis, and they can't go in because of NATO, if they do go in, then the whole region's up at risk of like nuclear war. So I think for me, it's a case of they're doing their part in the war effort to support the people in that country, which is absolutely the right thing to do. And they should also support all of these other people. But I also think it's an opportunity for all of Europe and all of the wealthy Western countries that are potentially going to be okay during the climate crisis to start building the infrastructure to support the refugees that are going to come. Because if we can give people a place to go where they can be safe and where they can have dignity, where they're not going to be sold into slavery or sexual slavery, I think, these are some of the preparations that we need to already be making and be thinking about, including how are we going to be able to feed people when there's less land available to grow crops, right? So all of these big issues are coming our way. And I actually think this is an opportunity for us to say, we've got it wrong in the past. We need to do better. How do we set up to do it better and take care of people? It's a difficult one because, people in Europe saying, why should we be responsible for the people who are coming from the Arab or Africa? It's not our fault. But the reality is, if you live in the West, if you live in Europe, America, if you live in the wealthy nations, it is your fault. The way we've lived our life has put their lives at risk. And so we need to step up and look at how we can solve it. I would love to, people say, oh, that's just naive. I don't care. I just think it's time that we sort of, started thinking about things differently because we can. We have an opportunity.
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you think, Joe?
Well, I think there are two things wrapped up into that, right? One is about how we behave regarding hostages that don't perhaps look like, not hostages, sorry, refugees that don't look exactly like us. I was thinking about, and this again might be one of those controversial things to talk about, but the whole Holocaust, right? I mean, had it not been Jews, had it not been people who look white, how would people react to that situation? I mean, because we've actually been in, I wouldn't say similar situations, but adjacent situations where there's been genocide, and it's not that far away from the idea of the Holocaust, but we've been more okay with it, and it's one of those things. We are fundamentally, I mean, one of the things that was mentioned there was about hypocrisy. I think we're hypocrites in the sense that we don't want to fess up to being biased, and we are inherently biased. We are inherently biased. We like animals that look friendly, that look like they can smile. We don't like animals that look like they have an angry face. We like animals that behave in a way that seems to show affection. We do all those things. So we've got to come to terms with that, and then I think we can move forward. You know, I think to just say that, you know, it's to try and deny that anything is an issue is not going to get you past it, right? If you say, for instance, someone says like, you know, I really have a problem with people or situations or whatever, which smell bad. Let's just say it smells different, whatever it is, right? And if you can't get past that and can't get to say that, you know what, that's my situation, but I'm going to get over it. You're not going to get over it. What you're going to do is then go into this hypocrisy, which is like, I don't see it, I don't feel it. That's not the thing, right? I mean, I had this mixed race couple friend, and they're friends and the mixed couple, where the Caucasian half of the couple said to her, and she's African American, said to her at one point, you know, I don't see color, and she was actually put off by that and said, no, you should. Because it's part, you know, it's part of what is. You should not pretend what isn't there, but you had so that you can deal with it, so that you can begin to do the right things about it. And as far as who's responsible for what, I think we're all culpable in a sense. And if you can find someone to be completely unrelated in any way through 4 or 5 jumps with anything that's happening anywhere in the world, then they're fine to say that, okay, I'm not involved with this. I mean, someone can say that, yeah, it's not my fault, and that can be completely true. But to say that I can have no influence on anything, I think that's a different story. I think everybody has a way to influence stuff, and you can decide to do something good about it or not. But you do have the ability to do something.
Yeah. Yeah, do what you can. You know, the idea of whiteness being something that we accept especially in this case. So there was a really great story about America like 100 years ago where whiteness wasn't enough. So the Irish, the Italians, or the Europeans, they weren't considered Americans. They are now considered Americans, but at the time they weren't considered Americans. So whiteness isn't always the definition either that makes you an acceptable person to be within the community. So I thought that was interesting.
All right.
So
angle. I think that there are 2 steps as well, right? There's the Anglo thinking as well, right? So there's one level where it's just about, you know, physically and racially you look the same. Then there's the thinking and how aligned you are as far as thinking is concerned. You know, I mean, I've you have that phrase, you know, someone will say, I'm not racist, I have a lot of Chinese friends. But your friends aren't exactly, you know, all across the social, strata. They're actually similar to you. They think similarly. They probably have had a similar education to you and all that. So it's very easy to kind of have those friends. But to really appreciate diversity, sometimes you have to. And it's something that we did a talk once about diversity, and the reality is it is difficult, but it must be done. It cannot be rephrased or painted over and said it's easy, because it never is. It really isn't easy. It isn't easy. Like if you talk about even as going into a situation where everybody looks like you, but they're just wearing a different uniform, you behave different because that's the way we are. It's a fundamental human behavior. If we all came, we all showed up, regardless of race, showed up in a certain kind of outfit, and there's somebody else on the other side shows up in a different sort of outfit which signals something else, we take the signal. We can't avoid receiving and behaving in some way, responding to signals. So it's a very complex thing, and it takes a real geek, and I think it takes a committee of geeks who have some sort of mandate to try and say, okay, now we have this problem. How do we take it and move it to the next phase, right? And I think that's where we're going to have something interesting. It's where experiments like brown eyes and blue eyes, comes out of. And I have a feeling, and this would be interesting as well, I think the metaverse is going to be a very interesting place where we may be able to address some of these things, because when you're able to customize, change, do things in terms of your appearance, your sound, your whatever, that might make things better. It might make things worse.
Yeah, we're right. Well, we know that men are abusing their AI girlfriends, so it could be better or worse. It's interesting. It's interesting. We've got to keep going, but there's so many aspects to what you just said that I think a whole separate conversation. One of the other big stories that's coming out of Europe. So we are on the path to famine, and it's this year is expected to get worse. So hang on to your hats. This is happening, but there's a biofuels argument, and the biofuels lobby in Europe is being accused of being immoral over the food crisis. So basically today, Europe turns 10,000 tons of wheat every single day, which is the equivalent of 15 million loaves of bread, into ethanol for use in cars. And the lobby is basically cynically taking advantage of people's concerns over fuel prices. But the study is saying the much stronger evidence is showing that the crops are needed more for food than for fuel. And, if we keep focusing on using biofuels, we're going to exacerbate the food crisis. So this is a really important part of the story that's happening around the world, not just because of the war in our breadbasket. So there's great risk there. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's one of those things. We a lot of it's to do with what works and what is moving ahead at the time, right? So, if you're in the energy business and the raw material is wheat, that is the reality that you face. You're not looking as wheat as a food. You're not saying that this is a food resource. It's a line item in your inventory, and it doesn't represent food. And I think that's a challenge. And I think if there's a way that we could, if there was a way, and this is where the metaverse could be very, very interesting, right? Where something that is on a line or in a ledger doesn't just represent one thing, that you can see it in the multi forms that it is, and then go like, oh, okay, this is what's happening. So if, for instance, for whatever reason, someone dumps the raw material that is wheat because it is what we don't need for ethanol this month, they don't dump it as that only. They see it in the many forms it can have, and not just to say food. It can be transformed metaphorically into the faces of hungry people, into death, into whatever it is, and then you have some kind of a way. So I've always said that it's going to be in the hands of artists, and artists have a job which is basically to hide the work, right? Good art hides art. Good art hides work, so you don't see all of it; you just feel it. And I think you need people to be keeping an eye on that. So, I think you would do very well to partner up with an artist who wants to go that extra step and say, I'm going to convert this into some kind of a message that people are going to feel rather than just cerebrally think about it. Because that's what it is. I saw an interview just the other day with Joseph. Anyway, I can't remember his full name now. But he said the job of the artist is to help you feel, right? As an actor, I help you feel. And I'm not here to teach you. I'm not here to tell you about the information. I'm not here to tell you what happened. I'm here to tell you or let you feel. And so if you can do that, you change the way people will act, because people will behave based on their feelings.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I suppose Sam Gaffer is sort of my artist in my daily tips, right? She's sort of visualizing my message around the words. But yeah, any artists out there? I've done some work with Tim Hammonds, who's a wonderful artist. But yeah, I love that. I love that idea. But anyway, so that's another side of things. So we'll move on to some other news, and just sort of keeping an eye on the clock, right? So first of all, there's a story. Fox News viewers changed their minds after getting paid to watch CNN for a month. And basically in this story, they were paid to watch 5 hours of CNN.
Yep.
And these were people who were 100% only watching Fox News. They were paid to watch 5 hours. And just by doing that, they were able to change their mind or their opinion sort of moved in a different direction to what it had been before. And what I found really good about this story is the message that not all hope is lost. That if you can be a person that's out there sharing information to give people alternative ways of looking at the world, there's value in that, even though it's not necessarily feels like there is, as somebody who does it all the time. But alternative opinions, if we could all be looking beyond single sources or single, if you're right leaning or if you're left leaning and that's all you're paying attention to, you're missing a huge part of the story. But not even just the story, you're missing the language that's being used. Why, understanding why, people who are in opposition to you, if you don't understand what they consume, it's hard to work out how to communicate with them. And we've all got to do a better job at communicating to sort of bridge across the aisle. So I thought that was a good piece.
Well, the insight that I picked up from that is actually the part where they get a choice. There is a thing about autonomy, right? So if you are going to bombard me with information and you say, I am going to tell you what to think, and this is a very familiar conversation for me because I am that person who has the insight and wants to tell you what I think. And it doesn't really work that well in the home situation, right? Which is where I find myself frequently, getting into trouble. But it has to do with permission. So in this case, what I see is the interesting thing is, they acquired the permission. They said, yeah, we'll do this, but we're going to pay you. You get to choose whether you want to do it or not, but we'll pay you and then you do it. So that's the choice and the autonomy that happens. And it's a very funny thing about how human beings are. The moment we are allowed to make a choice, then we begin to be more open to what else that comes along with that choice. But if someone takes away the choice, then we are very much likely to try and sabotage what we think is the objective of the exercise, right? So if I don't give you a choice, but I try and tell you to do something, you're much less likely to, no one's gone to their room when their parents say, go to your room and think about what you've done. No one's actually gone and done that. They've just gone to their room and then thought about everything else, right? Yeah. It's just the thing. But if given a choice and someone says, okay, you can do this or that, and then if you do this, please don't do that, it makes a difference. So that's the little bit of insight that I would like to add to that. I think, yes, you can always try and it's almost a backfire when you try to overload someone and overwhelm them, whether it's facts or not, because they're determined fundamentally for you to be wrong, and they will sacrifice the veracity of facts over that. It's pride can be a very, very dangerous thing, and I think that's what drives a lot of conflict, right? It's our commitment to our point of view, our commitment to our belief and behavior up to that point. We don't want to discredit ourselves.
That's good, really good point. Okay, let's move on. Partygate in the UK. This is okay. So there's one article which is titled "Wade Johnson Must Be Removed," which is in Prospect magazine, and I mentioned them earlier. I subscribe to that magazine. I think it's a really good one. They do good long form pieces, and it's very typically British focused, but I recommend it. Anyway, I saw this little video snippet, and I've been reading and hearing lots of different things that have been going on about Partygate, right? But Rees-Mogg, whatever his name is, he compared it to an LBW. What's the cricket?
In cricket?
LBW, right? Sorry,
yeah, like before wicket. Yeah.
My brother will be just horrified that I can't remember that I haven't watched cricket for 20-something years. Anyway, he said it's like a cricket decision where you can get LBW, and the umpire doesn't know that you've got it, and you don't know that you've got it, so you send it to an extra umpire, and then they decide that, yes, you're out by LBW. And he says the same, because Johnson was operating within the rules as he understood them. The police disagreed with that, and therefore he essentially hasn't done anything wrong. And it's just like, rule, just anyway, the whole politics of the UK is really, this is not a good time for British politics. This is not good.
This is the thing about, when I because I studied law for a while. My father was a magistrate, so I was immersed in that way of thinking about things, and he and it's the thing that I've come up with as well. Is that like understanding the letter of the law is one thing, and then there is always the other part of it where you go like, yeah, but this is what it was. That's what the spirit of the law is about, right? There needs to be a mom factor, I think, in politics, if possible. As in, like, we've got the different separation of powers, right? There's parliament, there's judiciary, and then there is the police, right? And I think we should have one more, which is basically a committee of moms, where the moms just look at it and go like, yeah, you know what? It just doesn't make sense. I just, you allow wisdom perhaps to be the thing to drive the decisions in that particular realm, right? I mean, because I think that's really what needs to happen. Like that, you can talk about the law all you want. There isn't any doubt that this is not what was. It's just not on, right? As the Australians like to say, it's just not on. It's like, okay, so yeah, legally you could do this, but it's just not on, right? You're the politicians. You're asking everybody else to do this. Somebody else, could be paying a fine or some kind of legal ramification for this very activity, for which you're now taking some advantage of the letter of the law with, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's it. I mean, they theoretically speaking, I mean, they wouldn't have to go and say, oh, this law, that law, or the other law. All you'd have to say is, well, I would like to be able to I could just throw the whole party inside of Parliament, right? I mean, then you're covered by parliamentary privilege.
Yeah. It's just so wrong. It's just so wrong on so many levels, on a human level. But distrust in the institutions is a huge issue in the world today. And some experts that I read, it's the distrust in institutions that have put us in the situation that we're in, because we've got nothing to fall back on, and then you've got leaders of those institutions just behaving like this, and and a life of getting away with it and being proud of the fact that he gets away with it. We've been watching this show, this British, and I can't remember on Netflix. It's something, I'll remember it later, but and it's the same thing. The Prime Minister and
by any chance?
No. The Prime Minister and like his senior minister are two friends who grew up in Boris Johnson type privilege, and the sort of stuff they get up to as young men. And it's almost like an insight into that sort of whole life. And Australian election is obviously coming up, and I won't talk about it today, but it's a pretty interesting election. And if you're interested in just global politics, I'd say keep an eye on it. But some new research was released, and basically the fossil fuel industry in Australia benefits from more than $22,000 in subsidies per minute in Australia. And this was released by the Australian Institute of Research just this week. And so basically Australians pay $11.6 billion per year to the fossil fuel industry. And of course, they see the fossil fuel industry as the industry responsible for the floods, the fires, and a lot of the suffering that Australians have suffered in the last few years. Well, it's been part of our lives, but especially in the last couple of years. It's a 12% increase from last year's figure. And it's 56 times the budget of the National Recovery and Resilience Agency. And this is basically the agency that helps Australians impacted by natural disasters. It's also 10 times higher than the nation's Emergency Response Fund. So this is the agency that will buy the helicopters and the planes that stop the fires from getting worse. And
it's Australian FEMA, right?
Yeah, if they're not spending money on more equipment for these situations, because these situations are getting worse, it's just crazy. Anyway, have a look at that. We are funding. Taxpayers in Australia are funding this, and the funds are not being used where actually the Australians are going to benefit the most. So the final thing in the political section is we've got the French election coming up, and Marine Le Pen is back in against Macron. He's looking like he's up. The first TV debate happened. He potentially won it by from what I was seeing. She sounded like she did a better job than she did last time, that she was more prepared. She's got a softer tone. But anyone with a nationalistic sort of approach like she does, so this is close our borders, take care of our people, as well as being a climate denier, if they're getting into power anywhere in the world, we're in trouble, right? It looks like Macron could win. And I just hope the French can see the bigger picture, that anyone who is leading now is leading a world that is suffering. And if we reverse course to these people who are nationalistic, close the doors, let's not cooperate with our neighbours, it's not going to be just a death knell for the country, but it's going to be a death knell for the whole world, because we need to start coming together and cooperating. So the French election is certainly one that's worth keeping an eye on.
I think about situations like this, right, where you think about you think about politics as a vehicle, and I think with the kind of nationalistic approach, and those are literally narrower ways of looking at things. And I think what you have to think about now is, okay, we're going with a broader way of doing things, right? But there is still, I think that a useful metaphor is to think about the size of the door, or the size of the space that we have to get through, as being quite as in being about the same size, right? So I think when you're trying to carry on this bigger bus and bringing a lot of other people along and all that, you do have to be much more careful about how you slide into the space, because you don't have much room on either side before you scrape the wall on the side of that or the other. So things like being protectionist and nationalistic, they're very easy because it feels very natural, right? It's like what would you do if you didn't think about it? You just do that, right? If someone bad's coming to your neighborhood, what do? You close the door, right? You don't necessarily say, look outside and try and bring anybody else who you can try and protect into your home as well. You usually just go for this natural approach like that. So it actually takes more driving, more politicking to be able to do this thing, which is the smarter thing. Like someone's talking about Russia. We imagine that a lot of Russians feel the same way we do about the war in Ukraine. And it's because we maybe are exposed to those Russians as we travel. We have friends and all that, and there's a high likelihood we're going to have the educated Russians in our universe, right? Because these people are they're literally here, so they travel. Our friends are speakers, so they've been engaged in that kind of thinking for a while. They're not the person who literally goes to a factory for the job to feed their family at home. They don't have the same, it's very, very difficult for them to imagine any of the concern that we have as being more than rich people problems, really. I mean, if you think about most of the conflict in the world, people look at and say, how do you solve the problem? We'll give everyone jobs and money. Everyone has jobs. Everyone has a job and are able to feed their family. Most conflict actually goes away because there's no reason for it. There's no dissatisfaction. There's no problem.
Yeah, and the friends that I was telling you about who grew up in USSR, they said we have to understand that probably 80 to 90% of people living in Russia will believe the narrative that they're hearing because that's the life that they're living. So the smaller percentage who we know, and we know that they won't think like that, they won't agree with that because they're global thinkers and they've been out there in the world, but the majority of people are not. They're still living hand to mouth.
And the same, as much as we try to look as far as Russia and other places for those kinds of examples, right, in and amongst ourselves, that's the kind of situation we have, right? So the challenge that I know it's so close to your heart because of the environment and everything else. It's for me, it's never been the wealthy who I have problems talking sense to, right? It's always someone who has no time to think about something like that and just go like, what is all this? What is all this stuff? It's just noise. It's just nonsense, right? Because it literally isn't important. It literally isn't as important. I mean, we can talk about as much as you like about something that is happening tomorrow. And because we're forward thinking and we're anxious over it, we say this is important. Someone who's thinking only about today does not have time for that. I don't have dinner. I don't care what's happening. Yeah.
So, someone who doesn't have enough to eat, cannot think the way.
It's just time frame, just a complete time frame.
Yeah.
It's not relatable. So they won't hear you, and they'll think you're nuts because they're committed to their idea, and you feel they're bad and they're nuts and they're evil or whatever it is. And all it is really is their perspective is completely different from yours. Yeah.
And the ability to put yourself in each other's shoes, right? And very few people have that. But then, we saw Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong and Jacinda Ardern meet this week in Singapore as well. That's another political story that I thought, signing partnerships, signing research deals, fantastic sort of stuff. And that's the sort of political sort of movement that we need, that cross-border, supporting each other, working together, bringing the best minds that in each of those countries together, creating opportunities for young people to travel and live in those countries, all those sort of things. So it's not all bad news in politics. But the US election in November is obviously going to be a big part of the story. That it looks like the Republicans will get back in and get the majority, which, it's basically going to make the next couple of years for the US pretty much redundant on taking any action because no one's going to agree. So that's something that's coming up. All right, so just moving on to COVID, just going to go through a couple of quick things. So the US announced it was lifting its mask mandate on airlines. And from a point of view of the pilots and the what do they call them again?
Air attendants now they call them.
Stewards. Sorry, stewards.
No, air attendants.
Oh, right. Okay. Sorry. Sorry to anyone in that profession. I just blanked on it. But, they're basically happy because they're saying they were just so sick of policing it. There was so much aggression. There was so many problems with their passengers. But what happened was there was a viral video which showed everyone going, woohoo, as the pilot sort of announced it mid-flight. So basically people took off their mask in the middle of the flight, but there were a bunch of people on the flight that absolutely went into a state of panic because they then felt exposed to COVID and high risk if they get it, something really bad could happen. So to me, it was a bit of a mixed win. The US is coming up to 1 million deaths. There are 986,000 deaths so far. There's an article in The Atlantic called "The Grief for 1 Million COVID Deaths is Not Going Away." But then we were talking earlier, so Shanghai, so a lot of us, particularly in Asia, we've got a lot of friends living in Shanghai who are living through this lockdown. Yeah. And the Shanghai government's reporting incredibly low death tolls, but their counting is inconsistent with the national counting. But the main story that we're hearing through our friends and our communities, of course, is a shortage of food and alcohol. So there's ones where food's turning up and it's all moldy. There's people getting food poisoning because of the food. And just the other day, I was sitting with someone who was showing me some pictures of some food packages that these people living in the embassy district of Shanghai. And so they're getting these two packages a week, which are considered pretty good, better than most. But one of the funny stories that broke is it's called the German expat phone call that went viral in Shanghai. And I put it in my weekend reads. And this guy, he went nuts, absolutely nuts. And he was talking to a lady who was trying to translate the government's rules. And he'd followed the rules. And he was just so exasperated. And he was just swearing and carrying on. And of course, the response from the Chinese community is, how dare you speak to somebody like that who's in China, go away, leave our country. But the vast majority of them were saying, yeah, fair enough. This really sucks. We've had enough. So so Tim's back. That's a pretty funny story. Did you guys have a chance to have a look at it? If not, you'd need to have a look at it.
Yeah, no, I spend enough time on my own phone calls to entertain myself with that. But
oh man, you can feel like the frustration, and he's constantly saying to her, "I know you're the one communicating with me, but basically go and tell him to F off. I've had enough." And then all of the things that he's gone through, and he's already tested, he's already been taken to these facilities, and then they hang around, and then they're shipped back, and then and it sounds like a pretty.
Was he the guy on the megaphone?
No, it was just on a phone.
Oh, okay.
Phone call that was recorded that went viral.
Okay.
Yeah. So to
Gotta
all of
be
our
up there.
friends in Shanghai, we are thinking of you.
Yeah, it's got to be tough hanging there.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. You ready to get into the environment? Because that's the big section.
Let's do it.
And I'm going to have to go fast. All right. So it's Earth Day today. And the first Earth Day happened on the 22nd of April, 1970, the year of my birth. Since that time, the population abundance of mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, and fish has decreased by, on average, 60%. The way we feed, fuel, and finance our societies and economies is pushing nature, as well as the services that power and sustain us, to the brink. That's according to the WWF. I think the biggest statement that's taken me by surprise in recent weeks, and that's actually really shaken me to the core, is the climate scientists were not expecting what is happening in our environment to be happening until 2050. And I already knew what was expected in 2050, so that's why it's really shaken me to the core. So the escalation is real. What's happening is frightening. And the voices are getting more extreme, which is why we're seeing scientists supergluing themselves to buildings around the world. I think they're sick of crying at home and they're ready to get out there and do something. So a couple of weeks ago, we saw the two poles have 30 and 40 degrees each heat waves at exactly the same time. And this was followed with the news that...
Oops.
Followed what news? I'm hanging on a thread here. Followed what news?
This is called drama at its best.
Yeah. Wait, it's a pregnant pause of thoughts of sorts.
So the quick update is you went to pick up Zoe a little earlier than usual today.
Well, actually, I was supposed to pick her up before the show, and I didn't. And a tutor turned up. So it was yeah. So I was just like, ah. So sorry about that, but oh well, I guess it happens. Yeah. So
Andrea was just talking about the exasperation of being told or explain some of the rules and procedures by a third party. I've actually been on that side of the conversation way too many times. As in someone's explaining something to me, and I actually understand it to the point that I can explain it back to them. But I find for most of those conversations, the worst thing about it is someone expects you to care the way they do about the situation, as in like they will explain to you, usually at great length, why something is happening a certain way, why this computer doesn't work that way, or what's going on and all that. And you go like, yes, I know that, but what are we going to do about it? And frequently nothing gets done about it. So, that's...
Yep, they're explaining to you the features, but you're trying to say, I'm not getting the benefits.
Yeah. I'm actually going to share an idea with you when you're dealing with customer service like that, because sometimes there just isn't a way, because the logic, there's actually what I call what is the word for it? I can't remember what it's called, but there's a flow chart that they have to guide their conversations. Frankly, if you are trying to get out of it, there's usually no way that you get out of it, because those are designed to stop with the person that you're on the phone with. But I always find myself getting out of it by saying, like, listen, I understand where you're coming from. I know you can't make any decision about this. Then what I would like you to do is just take this note down and escalate this to somebody who can speak to me, and then I'll speak to them. I don't want to continue this conversation anymore. And that kind of is a useful way of doing things.
Yep, escalate. The word escalate is the word to use. And Andrea was just talking about how the environmental impact of climate change seems to be escalating far faster. It always brings back memories of the movie 2021. No, 2012. 2012. Remember that movie? 2012?
Oh, yeah.
Where they're all on arcs.
End of the world. Yeah.
Yeah, the end of the world one. With John Cusack and Woody Harrelson was in it, and a few other people as well. And
it was quite a big one. Yeah.
That was huge. It was the disaster movie of the time, because I think it was because the Mayan calendar finished at 2012. And everyone thought, oh, well, that must be when the end of the world is. But there was probably some poor Mayan guy going, well, this has got to be enough. It's like, I'm making this calendar. Really, none of you are going to be here. I'm just going to finish here. I've run out of paper. 2012 as is. But anyway, in that movie, there was a moment where they were making all the projections about what was going to happen and how the tidal waves were going to happen and how the Earth's crust was going to split and all the chaos was going to happen. And then the scientist said, and remember, he walked into the president's office and he said, this is what's happened. And the president went, I thought you said this wasn't going to happen for another X amount of months or years or something or other. And he goes, I was wrong. And then the president went, in all my time in office, it's the first time I've heard anyone say that. And he said, yeah, it's happening far sooner than we anticipated. Yeah. And then they had to sort of scramble to get into their big ships. Luckily, here in Singapore, we've got one sitting on top of Marina Bay Sands, ready for us to go. And it's got its water supply, which we call a swimming pool. So if the whole thing floods, we can all hop into that. You have to gamble your way into it. The price of admission apparently is through the casino. But
so it's true what they say about how the whales will survive.
Yeah, the casino.
It's a casino joke. Okay. Anyway, Andrea, sorry, back to you.
Yeah. So were you guys there the whole time?
Yep.
Well, we were here.
That's good.
We lost you. We lost you as you began to talk about the environment.
Yeah.
Yeah, you were frozen and dropped off. Yeah.
Complete meltdown. So do we talk about this not being expected until 2050? Do we get that?
We were holding the fort until you came back to tell us what was happening.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Yeah.
So, you heard the Congo ice shelf had basically the size of LA cracked off and considered safe. We've talked about Thwaites Glacier or the Doomsday Glacier, which is supposed to disintegrate within the coming decade, which, this is huge because it's the size of Florida and it holds enough ice to raise global sea levels by 2 feet. And that would submerge the Maldives and many of the other smaller island nations. They don't really know when it's going to happen. They're expecting within a decade. I'm hearing 3 to 5 years. But the cracks that the scientists have found in it, like they've already had to move their camp within 2-3 year periods, right? So, but
unfortunately, I can tell you exactly the date because it'll be the day that I finish paying my mortgage. Yeah, it's a few years out still.
I don't know. From what I'm reading from the scientists, I don't think it's that far away. But anyway, hopefully Singapore's ready for that 2 feet. But the bigger issue about Thwaites is what's behind it, and that's raising global sea levels by 10 feet. But all of the warming of the sea level is already because warmer water expands, and that's where a lot of the sea rises coming from. But the whole point is, it's not a question of seas will rise 2 feet. It's a question of when. We just have to make the decision to adapt. So if you're living in a risky area, 2 feet, good time to start thinking about it. One of the bigger risks, of course, that we're facing is when the ice in the Arctic zones melts, we have a blue ocean event. And a blue ocean event is there's not enough ice left to reflect the sun, so the ocean absorbs the heat of the sun, which again expands the water, rises sea levels. And this is the big issue that if we have an ice-free Arctic for periods of time, and I'll put an article in my weekend reads which talks about blue ocean events, but why this matters, right? So basically, the jet stream, which most of us know from flying, it loses its energy because of this, and then basically what happens is the storms, when they come over land, they stay longer and dump more water in places where there might be farming, for example. So then there's no food. And then in places that are used to the rain, they're not getting the rain, so there's drought. And this is the sort of stuff that we've got to be worried about. And that's why it's really, really, really important that we stop those happening. So the other issue is it's an El Nino time. And they think that that's one of the issues that's pushing the climate extremes in both hemispheres. Another story, we've got less than 3 years left for the world to avoid climate catastrophe. And of course, that's not 3 years to act. We've got to do everything we can in the next 3 years. Some of the information in the IPCC report has been misinterpreted. The language was just a little bit wrong. And basically, if we follow the language of how it was interpreted, we're in trouble. But let's look on a business side. So MasterCard just recently linked compensation for all of its employees to its ESG goals. So this is the all-in approach. Yeah, it's a really big announcement. So we've seen some more and more companies moving towards this. But to me, this is one of those announcements that I think will potentially permeate out around, for the multinationals at least, because of everyone in the business is tied to ESG goals. And of course, we have an opportunity to create greater impact. So I thought that was a really interesting one. And based on just even you then Joe going, it tells people to take this seriously, right? Even people who aren't taking it seriously, right?
Yeah, no, I think it's it's always about attention, right? I always talk about how for change to happen in the world, for anything to happen in the world, the currency is attention, and you've got to get people's attention. So something like this really says, okay, this is serious, right? So this is one of the ways. I think a company can definitely signal to its people, okay, pay attention, and then that happens. And this is, I think this goes back to what I was talking about earlier as well, because I think the good thing that we have in the world so far is that we have a number of at least well-educated people who are in charge of companies, and this is about focus as well, how broad your vision of the world is, right? I think for the longest time, everything has been about corporations, corporate numbers, ledgers. That's the focus that you have there. And what happens is the world has changed, and this is one of the things that I like about. Okay, so I don't think social media is all evil. I think it has its good side, and this is one of the good sides. It's how you cannot have things happen in the dark anymore. It's very hard for things to happen in the dark anymore. So when you have something of significance like this, the company is exposed in terms of its reputation, in terms of everything else, and I mean, it still is about the board recognizing that brand is everything, and the way you can best look at the brand is to take a position which is going to make a big difference. So years ago, you had people take on diversity, you had people take on different things, and it was kind of cool. And I guess here's the moment now, right? I mean, the environment for a while wasn't that cool, because maybe there were too many environmental extremists who are making it bad for everybody else. But now the environment is getting kind of the cool thing. So it's something that they've chosen as their form of branding, and I see it with some fashion companies have chosen to do that as well. So Coach has a program where they're working very hard to move themselves towards more environmental sustainable practices. They haven't switched it 100%, but they're doing it a few percentage at a time. 15% of this is being used, or the materials being used, or 50%. They have certain numbers and certain benchmarks that are moving them closer and in the right direction. Their staff are feeling better about doing things like that. So yeah, it's a decision that is being made in the boardroom. It's good for business, but at the same time happens to be good for the environment as well. So good on them.
Well, we hope, and it's not just more greenwashing, right? That's always the thing that you've got to be conscious of, and I'm sure in this case it's not. But I think we need to start to see industries jumping on board. So all of their competition need to be jumping on board with the same business model. But we also need to be looking at designing new businesses with the whole degrowth. Have you guys looked into degrowth as a business of the future? Like the Netflix thing that we were talking about.
Yeah.
Maybe they can't grow anymore. Maybe they need to focus on excellence. Maybe growth isn't a good thing. That's where every single graph I look at is like that or that.
Yeah.
Every single industry, amount of people on planes, the amount of planes being built, the amount of fuel being used, everything's like that, right? And that upwards tilt aligns to global warming, and so we need to shrink it all down. So, and that's the economy we've got right now.
Yeah,
can't cope with that. So we're in for some shaky times.
But the structures that we have at the moment, if you're a CEO and you come in and you go, okay, guys, we're going to focus on degrowth. Oh, okay. Well, I'll put my things in a box and leave, and they'll be thrown out because shareholders have put money in the company to make money. That's the way that sort of system has been set up. So it almost needs to be like an alternate economy. It almost needs to be like a share market an exchange, a different exchange, where companies will list on this other exchange as well, and that other exchange rewards somehow this idea of degrowth or projects and things like that actually happen that are doing it, or a disruptor in the market comes in and says we're going to do this. But the thing is, if the demand is 100 people, and I as a Netflix have 80 of those 100 people, and I go in with a degrowth strategy, and now you might argue that the degrowth strategy is hold on the 80, don't go for the 100, or the degrowth strategy is probably let's pull back to 50 and do it really well. Then I've created a spot for competitors to come in and take the other 30. But then the other thing, I guess, in the discussion needs to be, well, if I think I'm the best CEO to run this industry, not just this company, but this industry from a planet aware, planet positive, climate positive framework, then I would like to get the biggest piece of market share I could possibly get and do it properly, do it the way it's supposed to be done. And I think those coming through with this sort of aspiration of being able to be that person, I think the challenge is degrowth goes in the opposite direction of being the responsible central party. The only problem with the responsible central party, perhaps I've chosen those terms in a weird way, is that you end up with a central point of control in an entire industry, which becomes monopolistic, and then the benevolent dictator hands it over, and in a couple of generations, it's been mauled by venture capitalists. So then who are milking the cash cow and don't care about the environment, sort of thing. So it's one of these delicate balances that the world has to look at. But I think in its existing economic setup and structural setup, it's very difficult for a degrowth strategy at scale on the levels of the companies that we're looking at to actually do it, unless you're doing something like an Apple, which go, well, we don't need, we can use the same box, the same style of everything else, and just make it better inside, and limit the number of, we don't need 10,000 different products where they're just disposable. Make them expensive enough, good quality, that they'll last a few more years. But I don't know whether they're the best example either, because the technology is advancing so much that we have to keep changing it as well. So it's almost like there needs to be a parallel economy that we get to choose to play in this current economy, or we get to choose to play in this parallel economy. And maybe the whole world of crypto can be something to do with that new parallel economy, except of course the electricity engine of crypto could be seen to be negative from a climate positive perspective. But maybe there's just this opportunity for somebody to come in and sort of create that, or a group of people to start thinking, what is the different way of operating? Maybe, believe it or not, maybe it's and I'll just throw this one out there, maybe it's something that because there are alternate economies out there. And for example, there's alternate banking. Islamic banking operates in a very different way to normal banking. So maybe there is an opportunity for this. It needs to be big enough. There needs to be a big enough movement of people that on Earth Day 2024 will switch to the new economy. Yeah,
and we need a complete overhaul. And when I first started talking to people about this a long time ago, I'm like, the stock market cannot exist the way it exists. And for someone like Joe, you'd be like, well, but we can't. We can't keep going. So everything needs to be transformed. So there's an article, 1.5 versus 2.2 degrees warming, right? What's the difference between 0.5 degrees? We're at 1.1, 1.2, depending. 1.5, we're going to lose 70 to 90% of the world's corals. At 2 degrees, we're going to hit 90%. We're on track for 3.2 degrees, right? We have no corals. We have no ocean life. We have a dead ocean. We are dead. We can't survive in the numbers that we've got. I don't believe that human extinction is on is on offer to us. It's certainly a path if we keep going, but we're not going to be that stupid, right? Well, who knows? But we have to be radical in our thinking and about what makes changes. And you're saying the shareholders aren't going to make any money. Well, the shareholders have been making money for a long time, and we've got pensioners living off these shares, but it's their making of money that's creating the problem that we're in. And at some point, we have to recognise that that's not a sustainable model for humanity to live in a stable environment, which is we're already becoming an unstable environment. And if you can't rely on weather patterns to grow food, the infrastructure that we have in place is relevant to where we live based on the last however millennia. Well, now those houses aren't necessarily going to hold up to ice or rain or typhoons or, so that's where we're moving towards, right? Unstable environments and the impact that brings, and droughts. It's a really big, huge thing that we're facing right now. And it's not little bits that we've got to do. We've got to do big transitions. So I think whole industries have to come together and say, how are we going to agree to change together?
Yeah, I like, because when you were talking about the MasterCard piece of news, it sometimes it's released as competitive advantage, and now Visa and American Express and are sort of, people are watching them to see what they do, but they effectively will be followers, and MasterCard would say, we're ahead of the game, they're followers. But it would have been really nice if they all came together and said, how about we all do this together?
Exactly. It's not about winning. It's about doing what we need to do to move forward, right? So one of the big stories there's a lot of coverage on the permafrost that's thawing right across the north. And I mean, this has been a big story for a long time, but just recently it's really getting a lot more coverage because, of course, this is the methane dragon, which is more potent than CO2 in the short term. So that's a big story. The boreal forests in the US, they're doing a whole bunch of tests on them now, whether or not, they can cope and how much warming they can cope with. And these are a big climate, big CO2 sink. And so, of course, we saw the floods in Australia, 2 lots of floods, which was unprecedented once again, right? But some other things that have been happening that people may not be paying attention to. So India had a heat wave in March that was like the hottest March in 122 years. And right now, India is going through another extreme heat wave. And the reason that this matters is India was being looked at as the country that could fill the gap on wheat that we needed because of the war in Ukraine. But now 25% of the wheat has been destroyed because of this heat wave. So that's going to increase the risk of famine around the world. And then in the UK, they've just had this huge heat wave, and now they're going into this blizzards and snow and freezing temperature. And of course, they've just all planted these crops, and those crops are now going to be at risk of not even being able to grow. And this is how it happens. This is how it gets worse, right? What's happening over there? What's happening over there? What's happening over there? It all starts to come together. And most people aren't even paying attention to the flooding in South Africa. Over 400 people have died near Durham. It's mainly because the poor people are actually living in shanty towns on the side of rivers. So when the floods come and they're saying it's climate change, people are dying and poor people are dying. So we're in a really
South America, Argentina.
Yeah. I mean, we're in and every fire releases brown matter that goes up to the poles, which creates more reflection. And but there's another trend that's happening right now, and it's called, I was talking about earlier, these people called the doomers, and basically they say that they don't think there's any hope and that we've gone too far and that there's no coming back from it. And I don't disagree with them. But the one thing that every one of the it's done, it's over says, the reason that we can't pull back from this and we can't solve it is because our leaders will never do the work that's needed to do it, because we are not going to ever be willing to change how we live to make sure that it's done. So it's on all of us, and that's what my message is all about. It's on all of us to make sure that we can have a livable environment, and it means we have to shrink our lifestyles. Billions of us. The 10%, who contribute the most have to shrink. So yeah, so just it's Earth Day. I just wanted to finish with saying, I've been talking. Yeah, we are screwed, but there is hope, and that's why I've never lost it. But I've been talking about this and sharing information on this for decades, and of course I get very exhausted by it. It's sometimes I sink into the despair of the information, and it's hard when nothing I'm saying seems to be sinking in. And I'm always trying to look at different ways of sharing information. I work really hard at doing that and sharing other people's information. I see what's coming, and the fact that we're where we're going to, that statement, this is where we were expecting to be in 2050, and it scares the life out of me. And every argument against change, every person that says, we don't need to do much, we just need to do a little bit. No, we don't. We need to do a lot, because we're going to make these changes one way or the other. We either decide to change, or nature will change for us. One way or another, it's going to happen. Nature will decide if we don't decide. And we can't stop our global economy, which is, of course, what they said at the beginning of COVID. Well, we sure did stop it, but there's no other way. We decide, and all that takes all of us coming on board to act, or nature will decide for us, and then we're going to be sitting there facing the consequences of that. And I'm prepared for that. I'm prepared for those consequences. I don't know what it means, like in practice, but I know what it means as far as it being extreme. But that's where we are on this Earth Day 2022, 50 years after the first Earth Day. It's not nice. I'll keep talking about it. I probably at some point I'm going to resign and hand over the reins, but I'll keep up, because I want our kids to have this chance, and it's on us. The adults have to start making the decisions. So that's the environment update for me. I'll hand it over to you guys. No, you're not allowed to give into hopelessness.
No, I'm not. I'm actually not doing that. I'm trying to be gentle in my you know me. I tend to be hopeful, but sometimes disagreeably so, right? I do feel that we find ourselves in a situation we go like, oh, how do we get out of this one? I think that's usually where we find ourselves in, and then we go like, oh, I know. Therefore, there's a good reason to be hopeless. I also think that, I was just looking at my own life in terms of how I looked at things, right? I mean, I was convinced that financially I had left it too late and I couldn't do anything about anything, right? But I kept looking for something to help me do better and figure my way out, right? And if you asked me 5 years ago, I go like, oh, you know what? It's too late. I've left it too late. I'm 52, 53. There's just no way this is gonna work out, right? And along the way, I discovered how to trade. I discovered a mentor who taught me how to trade and this and that. What I'm saying is, sometimes the answers aren't here yet. We think we've done everything we can. The next thing we don't know. We don't know what the next thing is. We don't know what is going to happen, right? And again, we don't know as well things like, for instance, people talk about the space exploration, and we've just sent all our information out into space to where we are. And some people have said that it's probably an unlikely thing that if aliens find out where we are, that they'll leave us alone and say, "Oh, good job, guys." It's possible as well that, I mean, just as an idea, right? I mean, if Andrea were an alien and she went into space and found another place where they were in dire straits regarding the environment, but she knew what to do with it, she would do something about it, right? So I mean, I hate to be this improbable person, but telling a crazy story like this, but we don't know. We don't know whether we're at the end of our tether. Based on what we have now and what we know currently, yes, it doesn't look good, but it's still there. We still have human ingenuity. We still have people trying to do things. We still have people trying to scale up ideas, great grand ideas that might save the planet, but for which people are still calling them crazy. But we're not. I don't think we're done. I just don't think we're done.
I have a where there's life, there's hope philosophy, and I'll keep going to the day I die, right? And I'm willing to exhaust myself to the point of keeping the message out there. Where there's life, there's hope.
Yeah.
But we've got to start moving fast now. And we've really got to start moving fast. And and the ingenuity, yes, that it's going to come. But I'm feeling like I'm looking at industries around the world, and they're just not moving fast enough. And I'm looking at like the stories of the oil industry coming through this war, and the profits, the financial services institutions, and how much money they're still putting into the old energies rather than the new energies. The government's not subsidizing energy research that needs to be subsidized, like the greenwashing that's going on. There is so much bullshit going on, and I'm just like, just give me, just show, because the problem is one of the reasons that people aren't moving in their own mind is they're looking around for examples. And if the big businesses make these decisions to radically transform how they operate, that will also be a message to we the people that this is something to take seriously. But if we're going to wait for them, it might be too late. So let's us drive it, and we drive it by how we shop, like Easter, right? You go into a supermarket at Easter, and it's these boxes full of plastic with a small egg in the middle of it. And we take it home, people eat the egg, and there's this enormous amount of waste produced from that. Why do we keep supporting that? Why do we keep buying the cream eggs? We know that the palm oil that goes into cream eggs is from unsustainable deforestation, and the orangutans are on the verge of extinction, and we keep buying it. Why do we keep buying it? Why do we keep buying into our own destruction? And if you've been paying attention to this for a really long time, it's a really challenging thing to just keep seeing.
We need food labeling.
Yeah, we need everything, but we need food labeling everyone can read. If you actually looked at food labels, even the label for palm oil, you got to know 50 different definitions for that. When I was looking at
sugar, it's the same thing. It's all about spin. But this is where governments can come in and change things. Governments can say, nope, you can't do that. It's got to be it's got to be transparent, plain English. If it's any of these things, you got to say sugar. Well, it's not really sugar. Yeah, but that people know what sugar is. They don't know what G55 guam gum is. Yeah. So, and they'll eat it. And they can't figure out why they're still obese. So it's got to, there's that side, because those big changes can happen. The single-use plastic one is adopted fairly quickly by everybody but there's an economic advantage in that. I don't have to pay for bags anymore for everyone. I've saved all this money, and I get to charge them for the plastic bag now if they want it. So I've offloaded the cost. So that one, there's an element of sort of skeptical something about it, but there's possibility. I mean, the changes need to be made, but it does need to be led. And it needs to, and the influences it's a call to power. We can make micro decisions, and if enough of us get together, those micro decisions become a big decision, but that needs to be led. So those sorts of movements need some sort of leadership as well.
Yeah. So what we need really is, like we have companies in tech who represent computing, video, different things, right? We need the global environment company to be formed. So this mega environment company has to take on that role. I think it's all about business, right? If you think about we talk about growth and all that kind of stuff. The enemy doesn't necessarily have to be growth. I'll say that yes. Growth has brought us here, or the chasing for growth has brought us here, because we haven't been saying that we haven't established what is a price we're willing to pay for growth. That's the part that hasn't been well established. But I do think about going back in time and saying, okay, if we could start all over again with certain things, with different people and different ways of scaling, if we look at scaling and we had a kind of ethical approach to scaling instead of exploitation, we try to share and empower and raise communities up, for instance, and that became part of how you do business. That would change the way things can happen, and growth could happen in that framework. If like the way MasterCard is framed this now growth is measured in that way. So that's going to be something that becomes the benchmark. And they've also, the reason why they've done it is not because they suddenly feel like they want to do that. Instead, they've realized it's profitable, right? And I think a lot of it has to do with that. And I thought one thing that we aren't thinking about sometimes is also the role that death plays, right? As in death of companies. The only way you will displace these big companies that are doing the things that are bad for the environment is other companies come along and displace them, and make it such that they die, their businesses die. You have to kill off the giant, and ultimately either the fuel companies die, or they pivot to the point where they still maybe are in the energy business, but they found a way that is agreeable to solve the world's energy problems.
Yeah. But energy requires government, and the lobbyists for the fossil fuel industry is obviously so powerful, but that's changing. And, the Fortune 500, the time companies spend on that list has been decreasing over years. So, these new players sort of are popping in and emerging. But, we really are talking about radical change in every way that we live. And people aren't prepared for it. But like I said, we decide or nature decides. The decision will be made.
Have you ever played a board game, for example, where you're playing the board game, let's say Monopoly, and it just never ends?
Like this show?
Yeah, yeah, like this show. I know we were getting that right, but it feels like the world is playing Monopoly, and it's a never-ending game.
Yeah.
More players are coming in and going bankrupt as the one that owns Mayfair keeps getting more wealthy. And it just feels like there's no end game. What would be interesting, when Joe started saying if I could go back in time and we can reset some things, that would be it's almost like that's the conversation we should have now. When is the end game for what we're currently doing? And I know people are saying we've got to change this because of the environment and everything else, and it's all happening now. But actually, if we really wanted to change the whole global everything, to shift it over to something, if we could go back to like the 1800s and go, okay, it's 1800. In the next 200 years, this is probably all going to happen. So let's make 2000, the year 2000, the end date when this will shift over.
I think you have to go back pre-colonialism, but has there ever been a time of pre-colonialism?
Well, when's the end of oil? So when's the end of it that we can go, okay, that's the end date, and we don't have to use it all up, but we could do that. Or when's the end of the way that we're going to do it like this? If we said, okay, well, the end date, and obviously it's got to be like, sadly, it's got to be like 50 to 80 years away so that people can change stuff. But at least we're heading towards there's a big transition. It's like Hong Kong handing over to China. Everybody knew it was 1997. Everybody knew it was going to be 1997. And then they knew they had 30 years after 1997 for the big final, amalgamation-y thing. So everybody knows it. And you can sit there and deny it as long as you can, but it's going to happen on that date.
Yeah.
And right now there's transitions happening and people are sort of dealing with that, and they're getting a taste of what might happen or that sort of thing. And they've got to make decisions. They don't quite know whether Hong Kong will bust or boom, for example, but they know it's going to happen. And it's almost like we need a date. We could call it a very real term. We could call it a deadline.
Yeah, so I think the date was the year 2000, but we were a bit too focused on our computers crashing. And so basically now it's not a case of a date; it's a quick as possible, because we have not, we've known since the 1950s. The politicians have known, the fossil fuel industry has known. So it's not a case of give us a date to work with. It's a case of how do we do it as quickly as possible. There's
we're still picking a
I've
date.
I've got a book on fossil fuels that was written by a couple of guys in the UK, and that's The Unsustainable Future, I think it's called. I'll bring it next week. And it talks about how we transition the oil and gas industry through a stewardship model. So we take it away from a capitalism model to a stewardship model, because we're not going to get rid of it quickly. We need to keep using it for a period of time, but we take away the capitalism side of it, so that we can start to wind it down without
it becomes government owned then.
Yeah, and then it's not a stranded asset, which is a lot of them are going to become stranded assets. We've got one of the billionaires in Australia is out there offering to buy up all this stuff and then turning it into a stranded asset, because he's made a lot of money and he wants to use his money in the right way. So we've got to start thinking in completely different ways. And there's hope around renewables, but we've got to scale it up quicker, and we've just got to do it. We've just got to do it, and the momentum is here. The tipping point's we're there, but we're not seeing that. We're not going to see it from politicians. We're not going to see it until business and all of us say this is it, and we vote for it. If we keep voting,
this is why even if we said we're going to work towards 2028, 2029, and then politicians now are going to be measured on deliverables, because at the moment they're not really measured on deliverables, kinda, right? Yeah. There's no sort of, okay, hang on a minute, we voted you in, you've done nothing for 6 months. I'm sorry, but you're gone. I mean, we should actually treat politicians like football managers.
Yeah.
If they don't win the title, they're gone. The players remain, that's the voters, but everyone else ships off. We sell them to Manchester United, sadly.
Well, I don't know if you recall my idea about under the penalty. Everyone should serve in government under the penalty of death, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. I think we should leave now. I think the show's. Oh, we got. Yeah. Look, I mean, I think it's food for thought. It'll be interesting to see where it comes to. But what possibly needs to happen is forums and discussions need to start happening with deadlines and actionable things that people can be measured on. Because we're not measuring it, it ain't going to happen.
Yeah, and industries need to come together and work out the solution for their industry, and need to make radical changes, and just need to accept it. Fast fashion should be a thing of the past. It's booming, and it's horrifying to me that it's booming. So the fashion industry's got to solve its problems. The technology industry, how are they going to solve the e-waste problem? Stop dumping it in the environment, fix it. The shipping industry, the aerospace industry, all of these industries need to come together and say, right, let's solve it. And if anyone sitting there with their shareholder looking to make a profit, well, I'm sorry, that's going to have to be put on hold for now, because we've got to solve this. And and it's not a time. You'll get rich in green tech, right?
Yeah. This is where weirdly enough the oligarchs and the sort of dictators, I suppose, the elected dictators of the world, have a super duper opportunity to show.
Yep.
This is very, but to show this is the way that you can run it. If it's what I say goes, and that's the way we're going to do it, that'd be the way. I mean, a place like Singapore, for example, we could immediately say, if we wanted to, Singapore is now a non-smoking country. No smoking. Saudi Arabia's done it with drinking. Sure, people will do black markety stuff, but boom, you've got longer life, more taxes. Well, cigarette taxes is quite a lot, I suppose. But you can make a decision as simple as that. Okay, well, let's make another one. We're not going to do where everybody's got to. You're not allowed to do It's like my freedom. Well, we're circling back to the beginning where freedom comes at a cost.
Yes.
And at the moment, the cost is too high, and we need to pull back a little bit and be responsible. And for that, we could be given some laws.
I mean, and that's all part of us accepting it. You know, we have to get prepared for this, because in order for us, you know, you look at the way the global population responded to COVID. It was, you know, it's so different in so many different countries. And if we all did the same thing for the same length of time, we would have gotten through it, right? And it was mind-bogglingly stupid what went on. And it still is mind-bogglingly stupid, I've got to be honest. If we want to get through this, we have to come together as a united society. We have to trust each other. We have to trust the powers that are going to do whatever they need to do to make sure that we're not going to go down the path that we look like going down, or we just accept that we're going to fail and we're going to go down this path one way or the other. Like if we can't come together and work out how to solve this together, we're not going to solve it. You know, so all the division that's going on around the world doesn't serve us. It doesn't serve anyone. Yeah. You know, all the rage at each other, all the hatred, all the fear, it doesn't serve anyone. We've got to address that. And then we've got to say, right, what do we need to do together? And we've got to work out a way to do that, because, and I suppose that's the impossible thing that most people see that we can't overcome, right? And I think that's fair enough, you know, that most people think that's impossible. But I think if enough of us say, come on, guys, we can do it, we can do it. I mean, no matter what side of the aisle people sit on, it doesn't matter. We're doing this for our kids, right?
Yeah. I mean, we need to, yes, we're doing it for our kids, and we're also doing it for ourselves. I mean, it's not, we can't think that we're going to be dead and later it'll all happen, because it's going to happen in our lifetime. So, you know,
I don't really care about me. I don't care about me. I care about my boys.
Yeah, but a lot of people out there care about themselves. That's why fast fashion's doing so well. That's why the markets are grow. That's why you're buying a fast car and all that sort of stuff. Yeah. It's not to impress your kids. It's to make yourself feel good. And we've got an identity problem, which is why the youth are feeling suicidal. We've got a hopelessness problem, which is why people are feeling down. So if we become traders of hope from a solutions perspective, I think that's a good direction to go in. Anyway.
I'm a trader of hope. I will keep being a trader of hope, but sometimes it's a bit dark at home, as my husband knows.
That's where taking care of yourself is really, really important, because if the trader of hope gets hopeless, then what hope do the rest of us have?
Yeah. No, you've just got to allow your traders of hope to have moments of hopelessness, because a true trader of hope will always come back to their hope. Yeah.
Just remember, the prophets of old were always thrown in wells.
Yeah.
And power didn't like what they always said. But invariably, the consequence came.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a consequence to it. Yeah, you got to accept it. All right, so we're going to wrap up.
We need prophecy, not profit.
Indeed. All right, we're going to wrap up. Give me one thing that's distracted you, entertained you, taken your mind off the world in recent weeks.
Ten Hag.
What?
Manchester United have a new manager.
Right.
It's a bit vacuous, I suppose, but at least it gives us hope.
Yeah.
See, it's interesting, but it gives us hope. We should rule the world like football does its managers.
Anyway. I like that idea from an election point of view. Yeah, Joe.
I have, for the longest time, not been watching late night show hosts regularly, because I had the impression that they were all just doing little short bits that were going to be put online. But there's one guy who's still doing it the old way, and I think he's doing it really well, Stephen Colbert. So I've gone back to watch Stephen Colbert do his thing, and he does great stuff. It's just the whole monologue at the start of it. And it's all the stuff to do with there's lots of thinking and jibing going on, which I think it's lacking in almost every other one of the shows, because everybody else is just trying to serve the 5-second attention span. He's actually still doing something, so he's not doing the what his name Oliver stuff is. I think Oliver does much longer pieces, but he's having some pretty good conversations. I like what he's putting out. So I'm catching up with old Stephen Colbert through some nefarious means over the internet.
Very
Right.
nice. Yourself, Andrea?
I watched this movie called Dear Evan Hansen, and
Oh,
I understood it as a commentary around social media, but it actually became something a lot more than that. It started looking like a mental health in teenagers, and then it went through to, and it's a very, very, very strange movie, but it's got a very compelling message. I'm wondering if, because it's a sing along, they sing, and
really?
they sing, yeah, and they sing their emotions, and you're like,
it's a huge Broadway hit.
yeah, and you kind of like, and then they've moved that onto the screen, and you kind of like, yes, the singing kind of makes sense for the expression of these deep, passionate emotions they feel, but does it really work as a movie? And I'm not sure, but I love the movie and I love the message. Steve was a bit like, really, you made me watch that. So, which I think is unfortunate, right? That they potentially turned off some audience, but it's important that movies like that are made. You know, those skills are, you know, they're important. So have a look at it, especially if you don't mind a singing movie.
Yeah, I don't mind a singing movie at all. Love them. I've watched Moana 5,000 times.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
You know, the problem with a movie like Dear Evan Hansen is Dear Evan Hansen is that the movie isn't being made because it has to be made. It's being made because it's a hit musical, and therefore it has an audience that will pay money to go and see it in the cinema. That's why it's being made. Right. You know, but at the same time, I'm taking away from it because I think it is actually quite a, you know, musicals. You have to be in a certain frame of mind to watch them in a movie sense. But yeah, so I'm just hesitant to have people judge musicals and say, does it have to be made into a movie? It's not really about whether they have to be made. It's just because someone saw a business opportunity. I mean, no one had to make Cats.
You know, but at the same time, so there is the commercial aspect, but there is an artistic element that comes into the movie making side, and there's that whole group of people that just create something, and there is a creative element that is just joyful, and what the world does need is joy, and and those movies need to make some money for the business of it to be bothered making the next one. But I do like the fact that they do. I'd rather them make a musical than a horror movie, because you just got to look at the 7 o'clock news. I think it was the Skyhooks were talking about. You know, remember horror movie? Yeah.
Oh yeah. Don't. I'll start singing it. I don't want to do that. That would be bad.
No.
I was watching. There's something on. It's a British Scandal or something, and the older daughter in Downton Abbey is the head barrister. And it's I like British dramas, and so we've just started watching that. And one of the things that I love about it isn't the story. It's not the Old Boys Club. They're filming it in a really different way. So this marriage is going through a crisis because one of them's had an affair, right? And the way the camera will circle around them at speed as they're being overwhelmed with emotion of in a moment. And I'm enjoying watching film being used in a really, really different way. So I'd recommend that one. I think it's called A British Scandal.
I started watching Moon Knight. I think it's called Moon Knight. Moon Knight.
Yeah. The latest Marvel offering.
Yeah, I started watching that. And jury's still out, but it's interesting in his multiple personality sort of thing that's happening. So it's kind of cool, sort of an internal metaverse going on, which is quite interesting. And then I think I ran out of episodes. I think there was only 3 or 4 or something. And then I was also watching what's the other thing I began watching? I started watching the book of Boba Fett. And somebody was reviewing. Did you review that the other week, Joe, where you said it is like a book? Is it slow as one? Yeah. So it is kind of like that, but it's written by Jon Favreau, who wrote Mandalorian, which I felt was kind of childlike and slow. And I was watching it with Zoe, my 6-year-old. She was enjoying it. She got a few little surprises. We're watching Boba Fett with her, and I think that's really the Star Wars market is somewhere between 7 and 10 or 7 and 12, really. So
the merchandise, right? Yeah.
Yeah, the 1977 version was a kids' film, right? And it's just become this cult thing because everybody watched it in 77 is now our age.
Yeah, exactly. All right, guys.
CEO of a tech company. Yeah. Okay.
We're gonna sign off. Only three of us here today, and we still managed to talk a lot, but there's a lot going on. So it's Earth Day. Make a commitment. I donated to B1G1 today. Planted 750 trees for Earth Day. So do something if you can. It's important. You know, we've got to take care of that which sustains us. We're not protecting Earth. We're protecting our ability to live on Earth. And that's really what it comes down to, you know, and a stable climate is a critical part of that. So
yeah, Earth will survive. We might not.
Yeah, exactly. She'll go through her cycles and come back, and you know, some other beings will rise, and hopefully they won't be as stupid as us. But anyway, you guys want to say bye?
I was just going to say, if Andrea did come down on that planet and knowing what to do to save them, that planet would probably shoot her.
Exactly.
You know, if the aliens landed here, we'd just go, shoot them first. Now what were we doing? Now we need to build guns to go into space.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
And I was just thinking what happens. And I was just thinking what happens if you know, the Earth carries on without us, and then another being comes in and takes over and all that. I would just hate to see the salamanders be in charge, and still for them to have a Manchester United.
Oh dear! All right, I'm going to end the broadcast.
I don't know what it is yet. Yeah.
All right.
Bye, everyone.